What made the richest cowboy in Red Creek cross a silent dance floor toward the one woman everyone had just humiliated? The fiddle died mid-note as Hannah crushed a blue ribbon in her trembling hand. Laughter still hung beneath the barn rafters when Daniel Foster walked past every rancher's daughter, removed his hat, and held out his hand to her. Then Hannah whispered something that stopped him cold. "Stay with us." By 8 o'clock, the big barn at Silver Spur Ranch hardly looked like a place where cattle feed had been stacked the week before. Lanterns hung from iron hooks along the rafters, their yellow flames rocking whenever the October wind slipped through the plank walls. Fresh straw had been swept into the corners. Long tables stood beneath the loft, crowded with roast beef, potatoes, apple pies, coffee pots, and bottles brought up from Red Creek. Outside, saddle horses stamped beside the hitching rails, while wagon wheels sat silvered with frost. Inside, 3 fiddlers played fast enough to keep boots moving. Hannah Collins carried an empty platter toward the kitchen passage and tried not to notice how many women had come dressed in their best. Dark wool skirts, polished shoes, hair pinned with combs that caught the lantern light. She had spent most of the evening serving them. Her own blue dress was hidden beneath a white apron tied firmly around her waist. Mary Evans appeared beside her with a stack of plates balanced against one hip. "You promised," Mary said. Hannah kept walking. "I promised nothing." "You said maybe. That is not a promise. It is when I hear it." Hannah glanced toward the dance floor. A ranch hand swung a merchant's daughter past the musicians. Someone clapped in time. Near the barn doors, Frank Turner stood talking with 2 cattle buyers while his daughter Rebecca watched the dancers with a glass of cider held neatly between both hands. And farther away, beside one of the timber posts, Daniel Foster was listening to an older rancher discuss winter grazing. At least he appeared to be listening. Hannah looked away before she could discover whether he was looking back. Mary bumped her shoulder. "Go on. There's work. The work is finished. There are dishes. There will still be dishes after one dance." Hannah gave her a look. Mary grinned. Then, before Hannah could stop her, Mary reached behind her and pulled loose the apron knot. "Mary, you've worn that thing since before noon." The apron came free. For a second, Hannah stood with her hands empty. The blue dress suddenly felt far brighter than it had upstairs. Mary had spent 3 evenings repairing it. She had let out the seams herself, resewn the waist, and pressed the skirt beneath a warm flat iron on a folded blanket. The dress was plain by Rebecca Turner's standards, but its deep blue cloth made Hannah's skin look warmer, and the narrow ribbon Mary had tied into her brown hair had seemed almost pretty in the small servant's mirror. Almost. Now Hannah could feel every inch of the dress. Every place it followed the roundness of her hips. Every place the fabric stretched across her middle when she breathed. She reached for the apron. Mary caught it first. "No. Give it back. One dance." Hannah stared at her. Mary lowered her voice. "You don't have to spend your whole life disappearing because other people have bad manners." Before Hannah could answer, a burst of laughter rose near the whiskey table. George Wilson had turned around. He was a good hand with cattle when sober and twice as loud as necessary when he was not. Tonight his cheeks were red from drink, and one suspender had slipped crooked across his shirt. His eyes landed on Hannah, then on the blue dress. "Well now," he said. Hannah's fingers went still. George nudged the cowboy beside him. "Looks like the kitchen's joining the dancing." A few men laughed. Mary stiffened. Hannah reached again for her apron. George was not finished. Somebody ought to check them floorboards first. The laughter came harder this time. Not everyone joined. That almost made it worse. Hannah heard several people suddenly become very interested in their cups. She kept her face still. She had learned that long ago. Never hurry. Never show them where the knife landed. She folded the apron once across her hands. A younger cowboy named Albert stepped out from beside George with a theatrical bow. "Miss Collins," he said, holding out his hand. "Would you honor me?" George made a choking sound behind him. Albert managed 2 solemn steps toward Hannah. Then he snatched his hand back. "On second thought, I just had these boots repaired." The barn erupted. Someone slapped a table. A woman covered her mouth, pretending she had coughed. Hannah heard Mary say, "That's enough." But Mary's voice seemed to come from a long way off. Hannah looked toward the floor. There was a knot in one board near her shoe. She fixed her attention on it. One breath, then another. She tied the apron back around herself. Her fingers worked slowly. The laughter faded by degrees, leaving behind small, embarrassed murmurs. Hannah lifted both hands to her hair and pulled free the blue ribbon. She folded it once and tucked it into her apron pocket. Across the barn, Rebecca Turner stood near her father. She had not laughed. She had not spoken. She merely watched Hannah with her head slightly tilted. When their eyes met, Rebecca's mouth curved into the smallest smile. Not enough for anyone else to accuse her of cruelty. Enough for Hannah to understand it. Hannah turned toward the kitchen. Mary caught her wrist. "Hannah, I need air. You didn't do anything." "I know." "Then don't leave because of them." Hannah gently pulled free. "I said, I need air." She took 3 steps. The fiddle stopped. Not at the end of the tune. In the middle of a note. One bow scraped awkwardly across the strings and went silent. Conversation broke apart around the room. Hannah paused. Boot heels sounded behind her. Slow, measured. Not the loose, stumbling rhythm of George Wilson. The crowd opened before Daniel Foster. He had removed his dark ranch coat earlier in the evening. His white shirt was rolled at the forearms, and the black vest he wore still carried a faint dust mark near one pocket from the afternoon. He passed Frank Turner without speaking. Rebecca turned toward him. Daniel walked past her. He passed 2 young women from Red Creek who had spent much of supper trying to draw him into conversation. He passed Nancy Foster, whose expression changed the moment she understood where he was going. Then he stopped in front of Hannah. The entire barn seemed to hold itself still. Hannah looked up. Daniel's face, revealed almost nothing. That was usual. Men in Red Creek sometimes joked that Daniel Foster could bargain over 500 cattle without changing his expression once. But Hannah noticed the muscle set tightly beside his jaw. She noticed something else, too. His eyes were not moving toward George. Not toward Rebecca. Not toward the people watching. They were fixed on her. Daniel lifted one hand and removed his hat. Then he extended the other. Palm upward. Steady. "Miss Collins," he said. "May I have this dance?" Nobody moved. From somewhere near the tables came the faint clink of a spoon settling against a coffee cup. Hannah stared at his hand. Daniel Foster owned more cattle than some men in Red Creek would see in a lifetime. His ranch stretched from the lower creek country toward the dark line of the San Juan foothills. Men waited for him to speak before deciding what beef might bring at market. Women watched him when he entered church. Fathers found reasons to invite him to supper. And now he stood before a maid, with dishwater still drying along one wrist. Hannah raised her eyes. "You don't have to make sport of yourself, because they made sport of me." A flicker crossed his face. Not embarrassment. Something harder. His jaw tightened. "I know." Hannah looked at the open hand between them. She remembered laughter. A blue ribbon folded inside her apron. Rebecca's tiny smile. George's red face. the floorboard beneath her feet. Then she looked at Daniel again. He did not move closer. He did not withdraw his hand. He simply waited. 6 months earlier, when Hannah Collins first arrived at Silver Spur Ranch with one battered trunk and dust on the hem of her dress, Daniel Foster had barely noticed her at all, and nothing in Red Creek could have predicted what would bring them to this moment. The freight wagon rolled through the south gate a little after noon. Spring had come late to the San Juan foothills that year. Snow still clung to the high ridges, though the lower road had turned to brown mud, where wagon wheels had cut deep ruts beside the fence line. Hannah sat near the rear, with one gloved hand wrapped around the handle of her trunk and the other holding her hat against the wind. Silver Spur spread wider than she expected. The main house stood on a rise above the corrals, 2 stories of weathered timber and pale stone. Behind it were bunkhouses, a smokehouse, laundry shed, root cellar, carriage barn, and 3 long cattle pens. Beyond those, pasture rolled toward a blue-gray wall of mountains. A ranch hand opened the gate. The wagon driver clicked his tongue at the team. Hannah watched the house grow larger. She had learned not to expect too much from a new place. A bed was enough. Regular wages were better. People leaving her alone would be best of all. Mary Evans met her at the back steps. "You're Hannah?" Hannah climbed down carefully. "I am." Mary looked at the trunk. "That all?" "That's all." Mary took one handle before Hannah could object. "Good. Means we won't break our backs hauling it upstairs." Hannah gave her a doubtful look. Mary grinned. That was how their friendship began. The servants' quarters occupied 2 narrow rooms at the back of the second floor. Hannah shared one with Mary. Their beds stood beneath opposite windows with a washstand between them and hooks driven into the wall for dresses and aprons. Nancy Foster appeared before Hannah had finished unpacking. She wore dark gray wool despite the mild afternoon and carried a ring of keys at her waist. "You'll help in the laundry first?" she said. "Kitchen when needed. Guest rooms before supper. Pay is $12 a month, room and meals included." Hannah nodded. "Sunday afternoons are your own unless we have company." Another nod. Nancy glanced toward the 2 dresses hanging from Hannah's hook. "We keep neat standards here." "So do I." Nancy's eyes paused on Hannah's face. Then she said, "Good," and left. Mary waited until the footsteps disappeared. "She likes order. I noticed. She also likes knowing she's the one who made the order." Hannah almost smiled. By the 3rd day, she knew the shape of Silver Spur's mornings. The cook, Mrs. Bell, started the kitchen stove before 5. Water for laundry came from the hand pump behind the shed. Sheets were boiled in iron kettles, scrubbed on ridged boards, wrung by hand, and hung on long lines between cottonwood posts. Cowboys came in for breakfast, loud and hungry. Hannah learned who wanted coffee black, who took molasses in oatmeal, and which men left muddy boots exactly where they had been told not to. She also learned the names they gave people when they thought a person could not hear. Old Tom, Skinny Pete, Crooked Jack, and before long, Heavy Hannah. The first time she heard it, she was folding sheets behind the laundry shed. George Wilson was talking to 2 men near the water trough. "Ask Heavy Hannah," he said. "She could probably carry both tubs at once." One of the men laughed. Hannah kept folding. Corner to corner, smooth the crease, stack it, next sheet. Mary came around the shed with a basket and stopped when she heard the laughter. Her mouth tightened. Hannah said quietly, "Don't." "I didn't say anything." "You were about to." "They shouldn't talk like that. They'll get bored." Mary looked unconvinced. Hannah picked up another sheet. Her thumbnail pressed into the center of her palm until the skin turned white. By the end of the month, She knew how to disappear without leaving a room. She kept her eyes on the work. She never stayed where men were drinking. She did not join card games in the bunkhouse yard on Sundays. When cowboys laughed too loudly near the kitchen door, she found another task. It worked most days. Daniel Foster remained mostly a distant figure. Hannah saw him crossing the yard at dawn with a saddle over one shoulder. She saw him talking with the foreman beside the north corral. Once she passed him on the back steps while carrying folded tablecloths. He moved aside without looking up from a receipt in his hand. That suited her. Men with money often expected the room to bend around them. Daniel Foster seemed to expect the entire ranch to work. That was different. One chilly morning in late April, Mrs. Bell shoved a coffee tray toward Hannah. "Take this to Mr. Foster's office. Nancy's got me counting preserves." Hannah glanced at the tray. 2 mugs, a small cream pitcher, sugar bowl. Who's with him? Cattle buyers from Pueblo. Hannah lifted the tray. The office sat at the front of the house beside the dining room. She heard male voices before she reached the door. One of the buyers was talking too much. "Best stock south of Denver, if you ask me. We can move 200 head before June if the roads hold." Hannah knocked once. "Come in." She entered. Daniel sat behind a broad walnut desk covered with ledgers, receipts, and folded maps. 2 men in polished coats occupied the chairs opposite him. Both stopped talking when Hannah walked in. She crossed the rug and set one mug beside Daniel. Steam curled toward his sleeve. "Careful," she said. "It's hotter than yesterday." One cattle buyer stared at her. Daniel looked at the coffee, then at Hannah. For half a second, something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Hannah had already turned away. She poured for the other men, collected an empty cup from the window ledge, and left. The door closed behind her. Inside, one buyer gave a short laugh. "Your staff speaks plain." Daniel picked up his mug. "So do I." That evening, Nancy found him in the office adding figures to a livestock ledger. Without looking up, Daniel asked, "The woman who brought coffee this morning. What's her name?" Nancy stopped. "Hannah Collins." Daniel made another mark in the ledger. "Why?" "No reason." Nancy remained there a moment longer. Daniel turned a page. That was the end of it, or so Nancy thought. Downstairs, Hannah was wiping flour from the kitchen table, while Mary told a ridiculous story about a mule that had chased George Wilson into a rain barrel the previous summer. Hannah laughed once. Short, unplanned, then covered her mouth with the back of her hand. Mary pointed at her. "There. You do know how." Hannah shook her head. Outside the window, the yard was going dark. A lantern moved near the corrals. Daniel Foster crossed between the barn and the house without looking toward the kitchen. He still knew almost nothing about Hannah Collins. But for the first time, he knew her name. The next time she truly caught his attention, there would be blood on her hands. It happened on a windy morning in May. The sky above Red Creek was clear, but the air came hard off the mountains, carrying the smell of pine, horse sweat, and damp earth. A string of young horses had been brought into the south stable before breakfast, and the yard had been noisy since dawn, with halters snapping, men calling to one another, and hooves striking the packed ground. Hannah was crossing from the laundry shed toward the main house with a stack of clean towels against her hip when she heard a hoarse scream. Then came the crack of wood. A man shouted. The towels dropped before she even saw who had fallen. Peter Davis lay beside the stable rail, one boot twisted under him, both hands clamped around his upper leg. He was 19, thin as a fence post, and usually quick to laugh at anything. Now his face had gone white. A frightened bay mare kicked against the stall behind him. "Get that horse back!" someone yelled. 2 men dragged the mare away. George Wilson stood near Peter, staring down as though waiting for somebody else to move first. Hannah pushed through them. Peter. His eyes found hers. I'm all right. No, you're not. There was blood soaking through his trousers above the knee. Hannah knelt in the dirt. Mary! Mary had come running from the kitchen door. Boil water. Bring clean cloth, not the dish rags. Linen if you can get it. Mary nodded and ran. Hannah looked at the nearest ranch hand. You. Ride for Dr. Miller. The man blinked. Now. He moved. George finally crouched. What do we do? Keep him still. Hannah pulled an old strip of cloth from beneath her work skirt, tore it clean across, and folded it into a thick pad. Peter looked down. His breathing went shallow. Hannah caught his chin and turned his face toward her. Don't look there. He swallowed. It hurts. I know. You ever seen this before? Yes. That was enough for him. She pressed the folded cloth firmly against the wound. Peter hissed through his teeth. Stay with me, Hannah said. I am. Then tell me what you had for breakfast. He stared at her. What? Breakfast? Biscuits. How many? 3. George muttered. 4. Peter managed a weak glare. I said 3. Hannah almost smiled. Good. Argue with George. Means you're awake. The stable yard had gone strangely quiet. Men who could rope cattle at a run and sit through a stampede stood watching Hannah give orders. She did not seem to notice. Mary returned with a basin, a kettle, and a bundle of folded linen. Doctor's coming? Sent for. Mary knelt beside her. Hannah shifted the pressure pad and wrapped clean cloth around Peter's leg. Hold this here. Mary placed both hands where Hannah showed her. Harder than that. Mary pressed down. Peter groaned. I'm sorry, Mary whispered. Don't apologize, Hannah said. Just keep pressure. Hooves pounded outside. A moment later, Daniel came through the stable doors with his hat still on and dust across one shoulder. What happened? Nobody answered quickly. Hannah did. Mare kicked him into the rail. Legs cut bad, but he's awake. Doctor's been sent for. Daniel stepped closer. His eyes went first to Peter, then to Hannah. There was dirt on her knees. A dark red stain had spread across one cuff. 3 ranch hands stood waiting for her next instruction. Daniel crouched opposite her. Peter? Peter gave him a weak nod. Still here, Mr. Foster. Daniel looked toward Hannah. What do you need? The question made her pause, not because she lacked an answer, because she had expected him to take over. Blanket, she said, and something flat to carry him on if the doctor wants him moved. Daniel stood. George, get the old door from the tack room. Frank, bring a blanket. The men moved immediately. Daniel stayed near Peter's shoulder. The doctor arrived nearly 40 minutes later in a mud-spattered buggy. By then, Peter was pale and tired but still conscious. Dr. Miller examined the wound inside the tack room while everyone waited outside. Hannah washed her hands at the pump. The water ran pink for several seconds, then clear. She scrubbed at the stain beneath one fingernail. Mary came beside her. You scared me. I scared myself. You didn't look scared. That doesn't mean much. Mary looked at her. Hannah dried her hands on her apron. The tack room door opened. Dr. Miller stepped out. He'll keep the leg. George released a breath loud enough for everyone to hear. Needs rest. No riding for a while. Keep the wound clean. Fever, swelling, anything strange, send for me. Daniel shook the doctor's hand. Peter's friends began carrying him toward the bunkhouse. Hannah bent to gather the towels she had dropped earlier. Dust had worked into the clean white cloth. She sighed. Those will need washing again. Daniel was still standing near the stable door. He watched her pick them up, Hannah. She turned. It was the first time he had used her name directly. He seemed to notice that too. Walk with me. She followed him beyond the stable, where the noise of the yard softened. Daniel stopped near the hitching rail. Where did you learn to handle an injury like that? Hannah shifted the ruined towels to her other arm. My father hauled freight. Where? Wherever somebody paid him. Silverton, Lake City, sometimes down toward Durango. Daniel waited. Hannah looked past him toward the mountains. I rode with him from the time I was small. Freight wagons break, horses panic, men get careless. Sometimes the nearest doctor is a day away. You treated them? I helped. That looked like more than helping. Hannah shrugged. Mostly you keep people calm until somebody better arrives. Daniel studied her, not in the way George and the others sometimes did. His eyes did not travel over her dress. They did not settle on her waist or arms. He looked straight at her face. Peter's alive because you didn't lose your head. Hannah waited. The pause stretched. She was used to what usually came next. A joke, a teasing remark, something about how useful a big woman could be when a man needed lifting. Daniel said nothing else. He merely nodded once and walked back toward the bunkhouse. Hannah stood beside the rail with the dirty towels in her arms. Mary called from the laundry shed. You coming? In a minute? Hannah looked down at the stain on her cuff, then toward Daniel. He had stopped at the bunkhouse door to speak with Dr. Miller. For reasons she could not explain, the quiet acknowledgement unsettled her more than a compliment would have. Later that afternoon, Peter sent word that he wanted to see her. He was propped in his bunk with his injured leg stretched beneath a quilt. You saved my hide, he said. Dr. Miller saved it. You got me there. You stayed awake. Peter smiled. Only because you threatened to ask what I ate. I didn't threaten. You would have told the cook I ate 4 biscuits. Everyone already knows. He laughed, then winced. Hannah adjusted the cup of water beside his bed. As she turned to leave, Peter said, Hannah? She looked back. Thank you. She nodded. That evening, Daniel sat alone in his office after supper. A lamp burned beside the ledger. He tried to finish the week's cattle figures. Instead, his pencil stopped over the same column 3 times. Outside, voices drifted from the bunkhouse. Someone laughed. A horse kicked lightly against a stall. Daniel leaned back. He thought of Hannah kneeling in the stable dirt, her sleeves stained, her voice steady while grown men waited for instruction. He thought of the way she had said, Mostly you keep people calm until somebody better arrives. Daniel looked toward the closed office door. For the first time, the question came clearly. What else had everyone at Silver Spur failed to notice about Hannah Collins? Daniel did not find the answer all at once. It came in pieces. A week after Peter's accident, he entered the kitchen before sunrise and found Hannah standing beside the stove with both hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug. She looked up when the door opened. You're early, so are you. I work here. Daniel glanced toward the black iron stove. That coffee fresh? Hannah lifted one eyebrow. It was. He almost smiled. She poured him a cup anyway. Outside, dawn had not yet broken over the mountains. The kitchen windows showed only the dark outline of the corrals and a pale strip of sky behind the eastern ridge. Somewhere near the barn, a rooster called too soon and received no answer. Daniel sat at the end of the work table. He normally took breakfast in the dining room. Hannah noticed. She said nothing. He drank. Stronger than what reaches my office. That's because Mrs. Bell adds hot water before carrying it up. She does? She says you drink too much. Daniel looked toward the doorway. Does everybody in this house discuss me when I'm not around? Yes. The answer came so quickly that he laughed once. It surprised both of them. Hannah lowered her eyes to the bread dough she had begun kneading. Daniel stayed until footsteps sounded in the hall. Then he stood. The next morning he came again, and the morning after that. At first he always had a reason. He needed to leave early for the north pasture. He was waiting for the foreman. He had papers to send into Red Creek before the mail rider left. Hannah never questioned any of them. She simply placed the same brown mug near his usual chair. Their conversations grew from whatever happened to be in front of them. Rain, a lame gelding, the price of salt, a cracked wagon tongue. One morning Daniel mentioned that snow still blocked the higher trail toward Silverton. Hannah said, "It'll clear on the south face first." He looked at her. "How do you know?" "My father used to haul that road." "Of course he did." She gave him a narrow look. "What does that mean?" "It means every time I ask how you know something, the answer seems to involve a freight wagon." Hannah pressed flour from her fingers. "That bothers you?" "No." He lifted his mug. "It's useful." Another morning she mentioned that the bean rows behind the kitchen would dry out if the June winds came early. Daniel asked why she cared about Mrs. Bell's beans. "Because I like eating." "That so?" She stared at him. Daniel took a drink to hide the smile threatening his mouth. By midsummer, the kitchen visits had become part of the ranch's rhythm. Nobody announced them. Nobody needed to. Mary would walk in, see Daniel at the table, and quietly reach for another kettle. Mrs. Bell complained that the owner of the largest ranch near Red Creek was taking up space where she rolled biscuits. Daniel ignored her. Hannah pretended she did not notice when he began leaving his empty mug on the side of the table nearest her, rather than carrying it to the wash basin. One morning he came in wearing his old cattle coat. The cuff had torn nearly loose. Hannah noticed while pouring coffee. "You catch that on wire?" Daniel looked down. "Probably." "Give it here." He stared at her. "The coat. I'm wearing it. That is usually how coats work." Daniel removed it. Hannah took the coat without ceremony and laid it across a chair. "I'll fix it after the laundry." "You don't have to, I know." That answer stayed with him longer than it should have. 2 days later, the coat appeared on the hook outside his office. The cuff had been sewn with small, tight stitches. No note. No mention. Nothing asked in return. Several weeks later, Daniel rode into Durango for contracts and hardware. He returned after dark with saddle soap, fence staples, 3 receipts folded into his vest pocket, and a brown paper parcel tucked beneath one arm. Mrs. Bell opened it the next morning. "Cinnamon." She stared at the tin. "Who ordered this?" Daniel was drinking coffee at the table. "No one." Hannah looked up from slicing bread. Mrs. Bell sniffed the tin. "Good stuff, too." Daniel shrugged. The old barrel tasted like dust. Hannah went still for half a second. She remembered saying exactly that 3 weeks earlier while rolling pie dough. Daniel did not look at her. He stirred his coffee, though he never took sugar. Mary saw everything. Later, while they hung sheets behind the laundry shed, she said, "Cinnamon." Hannah snapped a sheet against the wind. "What about it?" He rode half a day to Durango and came back remembering cinnamon. He bought supplies. "Of course." "Mary, I'm hanging laundry. You're talking. I can do both." Hannah clipped the sheet to the line harder than necessary. Across the yard, Daniel was speaking with the foreman beside a wagon loaded with fence posts. He glanced toward the laundry line. Hannah immediately looked away. Mary saw that too. Nancy Foster did not need Mary's help noticing. One evening she found Daniel alone in the dining room reviewing cattle invoices. She closed the door behind her. Daniel did not look up. That usually means you have something unpleasant to say. Nancy folded her hands. I've noticed you spend considerable time in the kitchen. Coffee's there. It has always been there. Daniel turned a page. Nancy remained standing. Hannah is a good worker. Daniel's pencil stopped. She is. A sensible woman. Yes. But servants can sometimes misunderstand attention. The chair scraped sharply as Daniel pushed it back. Nancy blinked. Daniel stood. Maybe wealthy men misunderstand servants. The room went quiet. Nancy studied her nephew more carefully. Daniel picked up the invoices. I have work. Daniel. He stopped at the door. Nancy's voice softened, but not much. People notice. Daniel looked back at her. Then let them notice something worth seeing. He left before she could answer. Outside, evening had settled blue over the ranch. The smell of cut hay drifted across the yard. Horses shifted behind the corral fence, flicking flies with their tails. Near the laundry shed, Hannah and Mary were folding dry sheets into a basket. Mary said something Daniel could not hear. Hannah tried not to laugh. Then she did. Her head tipped back slightly. The sound carried across the yard, warm and brief. Daniel stopped. He had seen Hannah calm a bleeding boy. He had seen her lift wash tubs, mend coats, carry trays, and move through rooms as though making herself smaller was another household duty. He had never seen her forget to guard herself. For several seconds, he simply stood there. Then Hannah looked up. Their eyes met across the yard. Her laughter faded. Not because she was embarrassed, because she had realized he was watching. Daniel gave the smallest nod. Hannah returned it. Neither moved. Mary looked from one to the other, then very carefully hid a smile behind the folded sheet in her hands. Daniel finally walked toward the stable. Hannah watched him go. She did not know that someone else had been watching too. At the front porch, a buggy had just rolled through the silver spur gate. A young woman in a pale traveling dress sat beside her father, one gloved hand resting on the rail. Rebecca Turner followed Daniel's path with her eyes. Then she looked across the yard at Hannah Collins. And unlike Mary, she did not smile. Rebecca Turner arrived at Silver Spur with the easy confidence of someone who had never needed to ask whether she belonged in a room. Her father climbed down from the buggy first, brushed road dust from his coat, and handed the reins to a ranch boy. Rebecca followed more slowly, gathering her pale traveling skirt in one gloved hand before stepping onto the yard. Nancy Foster came out to meet them. Frank. Rebecca. You made good time. The lower road was dry, Frank said. Creek crossing gave us no trouble. Rebecca's eyes moved once toward Daniel, then toward Hannah. Only for a second. That evening, Mrs. Bell ordered the dining room table set with the better china. Hannah polished the silver twice. Mary noticed. You're going to wear the forks down. They had spots. They did not. Hannah placed another spoon beside a plate. Mary leaned closer. She's pretty, Hannah did not ask who. She is, and she knows it. Most people know when they're pretty. Mary gave her a look. Hannah moved to the next place setting. The dining room smelled of roast beef, onions, lamp oil, and the apple preserves Mrs. Bell had been saving since winter. Daniel sat at the head of the table. Frank Turner took the chair to his right. Rebecca sat beside him. Nancy occupied the opposite side. Hannah served from the left and cleared from the right. She kept her eyes where they belonged. On plates, on glasses, on the coffee pot. Frank Turner did most of the talking. The creeks held strong even through dry years, he said. You know that stretch north of your west pasture? Daniel cut into his beef. I know it. You've been hauling water farther than you should. Daniel glanced at him. Frank smiled. No insult meant. Just a fact. Facts don't insult me. Rebecca lowered her eyes toward her plate, as if hiding amusement. Frank continued. There's no sense in two neighboring ranches working against each other when one arrangement could settle more than one problem. Hannah's hand paused over the gravy dish. Only for a moment. Nancy said, Some arrangements do more than settle business. Rebecca smiled politely. Daniel did not. Frank leaned back. You're not getting younger, Foster. Daniel put down his knife. Neither are you, Rebecca covered a laugh with her napkin. Even Hannah nearly smiled. Frank did not seem offended. That's exactly my point. A man can own half the valley and still come home to an empty table. Nancy gave Daniel a meaningful look. Hannah moved behind Rebecca's chair. Rebecca spoke lightly. I imagine Mr. Foster prefers cattle to conversation. Daniel reached for his coffee. Cattle usually say less. This time Rebecca laughed openly. Her hand rested near his on the table. Not touching. Close enough for Hannah to notice. She hated herself a little for noticing. Nancy looked toward Hannah. More coffee. Hannah obeyed. As she poured, Nancy added, Silver Spur may finally need a mistress instead of merely a housekeeper. The coffee almost reached the rim. Hannah stopped in time. No one seemed to notice, except Rebecca. Their eyes met for one brief second. Hannah finished pouring. Anything else? Nancy shook her head. Hannah returned to the kitchen. Mary was waiting beside the wash basin. Well? Well, what? What are they saying? Nothing that concerns us. Mary dried her hands. That means something happened. Hannah began scraping plates. Frank Turner wants access tied to the creek. Nancy wants Daniel married. Rebecca appears to suit both problems. Mary frowned. And Daniel? Hannah dropped a spoon into the basin. He has not asked me for my opinion. Mary watched her. That wasn't what I asked. Hannah turned on the pump. Water splashed loudly into the basin. The next afternoon, Rebecca found Hannah alone in the small sitting room, polishing candlesticks. Sunlight came through the front windows in long strips. Rebecca closed the door behind her. Not fully. Just enough. Hannah kept working. Miss Collins, Hannah looked up. Miss Turner. Rebecca walked toward the mantel. You've been here long? Several months. And before that? Elsewhere. Rebecca smiled. I gathered. Hannah rubbed a dark spot from the brass. Rebecca picked up one of the candlesticks and examined her reflection in it. You seem capable. Hannah set the cloth down. Is there something you need? Rebecca replaced the candlestick. No. She moved closer to the window. I was only wondering how long you intended to remain in domestic service. Hannah studied her. As long as I choose. Rebecca's smile did not change. Choice is easier when people have choices. Silence settled between them. Outside, someone hammered a loose rail near the corral. Hannah folded the polishing cloth neatly. Was there anything else? Rebecca turned. No. At the door she paused. You do understand that kindness can sometimes be mistaken. Hannah's face remained still. Can it? Rebecca opened the door. Very easily. Then she left. That evening, Daniel entered the kitchen before dawn's usual hour. The lamp was burning low. Hannah stood at the table measuring flour into a bowl. He looked toward the stove. No coffee? There is coffee. He waited. Usually his cup was already there. Hannah reached for a clean mug, poured, and set it down without looking at him. Thank you, Miss Collins. You're welcome, Mr. Foster. Daniel's hand stopped around the mug. The room seemed suddenly too quiet. He sat. Hannah continued working. After a minute, he said, Something wrong? No. You've called me Daniel for 3 weeks. Hannah pressed flour through her fingers. Then I was careless. Daniel stared at her. She did not look up. The coffee between them cooled. Later that morning, he found Mary carrying linens upstairs. Mary. She stopped. Yes? Did I do something? Mary adjusted the basket. You'll have to be more specific. To Hannah. Mary's mouth twitched. Daniel narrowed his eyes. What happened? Mary shifted the basket again. If you're as clever as everyone says, you'll figure it out. She walked past him. Daniel stood alone in the hallway. That afternoon, Rebecca rode with Nancy along the south pasture. Frank remained in the office with Daniel, talking water rights, hay contracts, and winter access. Daniel listened, mostly. But when he looked through the window toward the yard, Hannah crossed between the laundry shed and the kitchen carrying a basket of towels. She did not look up. Frank followed his gaze. For the first time, the older man went quiet. Daniel turned back to the ledger. Frank said nothing. But the silence had changed. By evening, clouds had gathered over the San Juan ridges. A supply wagon was due to leave for the upper cattle camp at first light. Hannah had already been assigned to ride with Mrs. Bell's provisions. Daniel did not know that yet, and Hannah did not know he would be on the mountain trail before noon. Before either of them could untangle what had changed between them, the mountains would leave them nowhere to hide. The supply wagon left Silver Spur just after sunrise. Mrs. Bell had packed flour, salt pork, coffee, lamp oil, dried beans, and 2 crates of canned peaches for the men working the upper pasture. Hannah rode beside the driver with a blanket across her knees and a canvas list folded inside her coat pocket. The road climbed slowly out of the valley. By mid-morning, Red Creek had disappeared behind them. Pines crowded the trail. Patches of old snow still hid in shaded cuts, and the wheels struck loose stone often enough to make the wagon sway. Hannah checked the sky. Clouds had begun gathering over the western ridge. The driver noticed too. Storm will stay high. Hannah looked at the darkening line above the trees. Maybe. An hour later, thunder rolled across the mountains. Not loud at first, just close enough to make the horses lift their heads. The first rain came as scattered drops against the wagon canvas. Then the wind shifted. Hannah grabbed the seat rail as the team shied. Easy! The driver pulled hard on the reins. Lightning flashed somewhere beyond the ridge. One of the horses lunged sideways. The wagon wheel struck a buried rock. Wood cracked. The whole load tilted. Hannah barely had time to jump. The wagon rolled onto its side with a heavy crash. A crate split open. Tin cans scattered down the muddy slope. One of the ranch hands riding behind them was thrown beneath a loose sideboard. Harlan! Hannah ran toward him. He was pinned at the shoulder, dazed but conscious. Don't move. I wasn't planning to. Rain came harder now. The driver and another cowboy tried lifting the board. It would not budge. Hannah spotted a broken fence pole tied beneath the wagon bed. Use that. They stared at her. As a lever. Together they wedged the pole beneath the timber. On three, the board rose just enough. Hannah pulled Harlan free by his coat. He groaned and rolled onto his back. You hurt bad. Shoulder. Can you move your fingers? He did. Good. Hooves pounded through the rain. Daniel appeared between the trees with two riders behind him. His hat brim streamed water. He swung down before his horse fully stopped. What happened? Wheel struck rock, Hannah said. Harlan's shoulder took the worst of it. The team's loose. Daniel looked once at the overturned wagon, then at her. You hurt? No. His eyes stayed on her another second. Good. He turned to the men. Get Harlan onto my spare horse. Take him to the lower camp. They worked fast. One crate was saved. Most of the flour was ruined. The driver tied what remained beneath a tarp. Daniel led the frightened team while Hannah gathered scattered supplies from the mud. By the time they were ready to move, the trail behind them had become a shallow stream. Thunder rolled again. Daniel looked toward the ridge. We're not taking the wagon higher, the driver nodded. There's a line cabin above Dead Man's Creek. Half a mile? Little more. They split the supplies between horses. Daniel told the injured man and two riders to head downhill. Hannah mounted one of the calmer mares. I'm coming with you. Daniel looked up. You can go back. So can you. That's different. Hannah settled into the saddle. Is it? Rain dripped from the end of Daniel's nose. For the first time in 2 days, something almost like their old rhythm returned. He shook his head. Stay close. They rode upward. The trail narrowed above the creek. Water rushed brown between the rocks below. The rain turned cold enough to sting Hannah's cheeks. When another clap of thunder startled her mare, Daniel reached for the bridle, then stopped before touching it. Hannah steadied the horse herself. I've got her. I see that. The cabin appeared near dusk. One room. Rough log walls. A sagging roof. A stone chimney blackened by years of smoke. Daniel pushed open the swollen door with his shoulder. Inside smelled of old ashes, wet wood, and mice. Palace, Hannah said. Daniel looked at her. That your professional opinion? It has walls, high standards. They managed a small fire from dry kindling stored beneath the hearth. Hannah hung her wet coat over a chair. Daniel set the lantern on the table. For a while neither spoke. Rain rattled the roof. Water dripped steadily into a tin basin Daniel placed beneath a leak. The room was too small for avoidance. Daniel sat across from her. Hannah. She looked at the fire. What? What happened? With the wagon? You know what I mean. She rubbed her palms together near the flame. Nothing. You stopped talking to me. I talked to you. You started calling me Mr. Foster. That is your name. He leaned back. You never cared before. Hannah said nothing. Daniel waited. Outside, the creek roared louder. Finally, he said, Was it Rebecca? Hannah looked up sharply. That was answer enough. Daniel's face changed, barely, but she saw it. You think I'm going to marry her? Hannah looked back at the fire. I think what you do is your business. That didn't answer me. I'm your employee. Daniel's jaw tightened. I know what you are. The words came out wrong. Hannah's eyes lifted. Daniel caught it immediately. That isn't what I meant, no? He rubbed a hand over his face. No. Silence returned. The lantern flame trembled. Hannah finally spoke. Men with money can afford kindness. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? It means kindness costs you very little. That's what you think this is? I think you like coffee. I do, and conversation. Yes, and being treated like a person before sunrise when nobody important is watching. Daniel stared at her. So do you. Hannah's mouth pressed tight. He noticed. Tell me. She shook her head. Hannah. No. He waited. That was the thing that finally broke her resistance. He did not command. He did not press. He simply sat there. Hannah looked toward the rain-dark window. There was a man once. Daniel went still. He worked in a store my father supplied. Samuel Price. She rolled the edge of her damp sleeve between two fingers. He was kind when nobody else was around. Daniel said nothing. He brought me peppermint sticks, helped father load flour sacks, walked beside our wagon sometimes when the road was bad. Her voice stayed even. He told me he liked me. Daniel's hand tightened around his coffee mug. Hannah continued. One night I heard him outside the store with 3 friends. They asked whether he meant to marry me. The fire snapped. He laughed. Daniel looked down. Hannah stared at the flame. Said he might if I lost half of myself first. Daniel's face hardened. He said that? He was young. That doesn't excuse it. I know. Did you marry him? Hannah looked at him. No. Something in Daniel's shoulders loosened before he could hide it. Hannah noticed. She almost smiled. Almost. Instead, she said, That taught me something. What? Kindness is easy when nobody's watching. Daniel held her gaze. The rain beat harder against the cabin. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Daniel set his mug down. Watch what a man does when everybody is. Hannah's breath caught. Daniel seemed to realize the weight of what he had said only after it left him. He did not reach for her, did not move closer. He stood, crossed to the hearth, and added another piece of wood. The distance between them remained, but it no longer felt empty. Much later, when the storm softened, Hannah wrapped herself in the blanket from the wagon and slept in the chair near the fire. Daniel took the floor by the door. At some point before dawn, she woke. The fire had burned low. Daniel was asleep with one arm beneath his head. His coat lay over Hannah's shoulders. She did not remember him placing it there. For a long moment she watched him. Then she pulled the coat closer. By morning the rain had stopped. Mist hung between the pines. The road below shone black with mud. Daniel saddled the horses while Hannah folded his coat across the cabin chair. When he came back inside, she held it out. Thank you. He took it. Their fingers nearly touched. Neither hurried away. Then Hannah released the fabric. They rode back toward Silver Spur side by side. Nothing had been settled. Nothing had been promised in words either of them could safely repeat. But Daniel Foster had told Hannah Collins to watch what he did when everybody was looking. Neither of them knew that before autumn was over, almost the entire valley would. By the first week of October, the aspens above Red Creek had turned yellow, and the mornings came cold enough to silver the water troughs with a thin skin of ice. Silver Spur had reason to celebrate. A cattle buyer from Pueblo had signed for more than 600 head, the largest contract Daniel had secured in years. The final papers arrived by mail coach with 2 receipts, a freight schedule, and a note confirming delivery before the first heavy snow. Daniel read the letter twice in his office. Then he walked into the kitchen. We're having a harvest party. Mrs. Bell looked up from peeling apples. A what? A party. She stared at him as if he had announced plans to grow wheat on the roof. When? 3 weeks. Mrs. Bell put down the knife. For how many? Daniel hesitated. Nancy answered from the doorway. Half the valley, apparently. Daniel glanced at her. Nancy held up the guest list. You invited every ranch family between Red Creek and Pine Hollow. Not every family, close enough. Mary laughed into a flour sack. Hannah kept kneading bread. She had spoken little to Daniel about the storm since returning from Dead Man's Creek. Not because the cabin meant nothing, because it meant too much. Their early coffee had returned, but something had changed inside the quiet. Daniel sometimes sat longer. Hannah sometimes forgot to find another task. Once, while she was pouring his coffee, their hands brushed against the handle of the pot. Neither moved for a heartbeat. Then Hannah let go. Daniel cleared his throat. Neither mentioned it. The party changed the rhythm of the ranch. Barrels of apples arrived from a farm south of town. Nancy ordered extra lamp oil, table linen, and 2 cases of bottled cider. Mrs. Bell began baking pies in batches and sent George Wilson to Red Creek twice for sugar after he returned the first time with the wrong amount. Men repaired the barn doors and replaced 3 loose floorboards. Hannah noticed that detail. She wished she had not. Talk spread faster than the preparations. By the second week, Mary returned from the general store carrying flour, thread, and information. You know what people are saying? Hannah was pinning a sheet to the laundry line. No. That Daniel might announce an engagement. Hannah's hands stopped. Only for a second. To Rebecca? Mary made a face. Who else? The wind snapped the sheet between them. Hannah reached for another clothespin. Then I hope they'll be happy. Mary stared at her. That sounded painful even from here. It was meant to sound polite. It failed. Hannah picked up the empty basket. I have towels to fold. Rebecca arrived at Silver Spur 4 days before the party. This time she came without her father. Nancy welcomed her into the house and immediately began discussing flowers, table arrangements, and where the musicians would sit. Rebecca behaved as though she had already been given a place she merely needed to occupy. She spoke of the main house as if imagining curtains. She asked whether Daniel intended to enlarge the dining room. Once, Hannah entered the parlor carrying tea and heard Rebecca say, "When a house becomes a family home, you start noticing what must change." Daniel stood by the fireplace. His expression gave nothing away. Hannah set the tray down. Rebecca looked at her. Thank you, Hannah. It was the first time she had used her first name. Hannah did not like it. That evening, she told Mary she would work supper during the party and go upstairs before the dancing began. Mary was sewing beside the lamp. No. Hannah looked up. No. You're dancing. With whom? Somebody. That is reassuring. Mary reached into the bottom of Hannah's trunk. Hannah sat upright. What are you doing? Mary pulled out the blue dress. The dress had been folded beneath an old shawl for years. Hannah stared at it. I forgot that was there. No, you didn't. I haven't worn it since Pueblo. I know. Mary shook it out. The fabric was still good, though one seam had pulled at the waist and the sleeves needed taking in. Hannah looked toward the door. I'm not wearing that. You are. It doesn't fit. It will. Mary held it against her. Hannah stepped back. No. Mary lowered the dress. For once, she did not joke. You told me about Samuel. Hannah's face changed. Not all of it. Enough. Mary folded the blue fabric over one arm. You stopped wearing this because he made you ashamed of being seen in it. That isn't the same thing. Then prove me wrong." Hannah looked at the dress. The room was quiet, except for the stove ticking as it cooled. Finally, she said, "It will need work." Mary smiled. "I have thread." For 3 evenings, they repaired it. Mary let out the waist, strengthened the side seams, and moved 2 buttons. Hannah hemmed the skirt herself. On the afternoon of the party, the ranch changed completely. Lanterns were hung from the barn rafters. Long tables stood beneath the loft. The smell of roast beef, cinnamon, coffee, and wood smoke drifted across the yard. Wagons began arriving before sunset. Hannah spent the first hours in her work dress and apron. Then Mary dragged her upstairs. 5 minutes. "We don't have 5 minutes. We do now." Hannah changed behind the folding screen. When she stepped out, Mary went quiet. That worried her more than laughter would have. "Well?" Mary smiled slowly. "There you are." Hannah turned toward the small mirror. The blue dress followed her shape instead of trying to hide it. Her first instinct was to tug the fabric loose at her waist. Mary slapped her hand away. "Leave it." Hannah reached for the gray shawl hanging beside the bed. Mary took it first. "I may want that." "You're not cold." Hannah looked at her. Mary hung the shawl back on its peg. Then she picked up a narrow blue ribbon and tied it into Hannah's brown hair. Hannah stared at herself again. For several seconds, she did not look away. Downstairs, the first fiddle had begun tuning. Mary opened the door. "Ready?" "No." "Good." They walked downstairs anyway. At the bottom of the staircase, Hannah stopped. The front hall was full of voices. Men in clean shirts and dark coats. Women in polished boots and wool dresses. Cattlemen who owned entire valleys stood laughing beneath the lamps. Daniel was near the parlor doors with Frank Turner. Rebecca stood beside them in a green dress trimmed at the collar. Frank was saying something about winter access to the creek. Daniel nodded. Then he saw Hannah. The rest of Frank's sentence went unanswered. Daniel simply looked. Hannah's hand tightened on the banister. He did not smile. That would have been easier. He just stood there, still enough that Frank finally turned to see what had caught his attention. Rebecca followed his gaze. Her eyes traveled from Hannah's face to the blue dress, then back to Daniel. Something in Rebecca's expression hardened before she covered it with a smile. Mary leaned close to Hannah. "Breathe." Hannah let go of the banister. Daniel finally remembered Frank was speaking. "Sorry. What did you say?" Frank looked from Daniel to Hannah and back again. "Nothing important." Hannah moved toward the kitchen. As she passed Daniel, he stepped aside to give her room. Their sleeves almost touched. He lowered his voice. "Blue suits you." Hannah stopped. For a moment, she could not answer. Then she said, "Thank you." Daniel nodded. No flourish. No compliment loud enough for anyone else. Just 2 words given quietly. Hannah continued into the kitchen. Behind her, Rebecca watched Daniel watch her go. By nightfall, the barn would be filled with music, whiskey, laughter, and nearly every family that mattered in Red Creek. For years, Hannah had survived by making herself difficult to notice. Tonight, for the first time in a long while, she had stepped into the light willingly. And someone was already waiting for that courage to become a weakness. By 9 o'clock, the barn was warm from bodies and lanterns. Cold air still slipped in whenever the doors opened, carrying the smell of horses and damp earth. But inside there was coffee, roast beef, cinnamon, tobacco smoke, and the sharp bite of whiskey from the far table. The musicians had moved from reels into slower dances. Hannah had spent most of the evening working. She carried plates, refilled cups, helped Mrs. Bell slice pies. Every so often, she caught Daniel looking toward the kitchen passage. Every time she pretended not to notice. Rebecca did notice. She stood near Nancy and two women from Red Creek, smiling at the right moments, her green dress catching the lantern light. Frank Turner had been drinking cider and talking business with three ranchers near the loft stairs. George Wilson had been drinking something stronger. Mary came into the kitchen with two empty platters. "That's enough." Hannah kept stacking dishes. "Enough what?" "Working. There are still cups out there. Mrs. Bell has cups." From across the room, Mrs. Bell said, "I do." Hannah looked betrayed. Mrs. Bell did not even turn around. "Go dance before Mary starts breaking things." Mary untied Hannah's apron. This time Hannah let her. The blue dress appeared beneath it. Mary folded the apron and set it on the table. "You look fine." Hannah smoothed the skirt once. "Fine is a dangerous word." "Then you look better than fine." Hannah gave her a look. Mary smiled. "Go." They stepped into the barn together. The crowd had thinned from the supper tables and gathered around the open floor. Hannah stayed near the wall at first. A ranch wife nodded to her. Peter Davis, still favoring the leg he had injured in spring, lifted his cup in greeting. "Evening, Hannah." "Peter, you dancing?" "I haven't decided." "You should." He said it simply. No joke. Hannah thanked him. For a few minutes, nothing happened. That made her breathe easier. Mary was drawn into a dance by one of the younger ranch hands. Hannah watched from near a timber post. Daniel stood across the room speaking with a cattle buyer. Rebecca was beside him. Then George saw Hannah. He leaned against the whiskey table with one boot crossed over the other. "Well now." Hannah felt her stomach tighten. George lifted his cup. "Look who finally got out of the kitchen." A few men glanced over. Hannah ignored him. George laughed. "Careful, boys. Somebody better check them floorboards." The line landed exactly as he wanted. A few men laughed. Then more. Not everybody, but enough. Hannah's face stayed still. She could feel heat move up her neck. Mary stopped dancing. Daniel turned his head. George was already enjoying himself. Another cowboy, younger and foolish enough to follow whatever got attention, stepped into the open space. "Miss Collins." He bowed too deeply. "Would you do me the honor?" A few people chuckled before the joke was finished. Hannah looked at him. He stretched out one hand, then pulled it back with a grin. "On second thought, I need these boots tomorrow." The laughter came louder. Somebody slapped George on the shoulder. Hannah heard a woman say, "Oh, stop," but she was laughing too. Hannah looked toward Rebecca. Rebecca was not laughing. That was almost worse. Her face remained composed. Her eyes met Hannah's, and in them sat the same thing Hannah had seen before. Satisfaction disguised as innocence. Hannah reached for the apron she had folded over one arm. Mary came toward her. "No." Hannah tied it anyway. "Hannah, I'm done. You didn't do anything, I know." She reached up and pulled the blue ribbon from her hair. Her fingers shook once. She closed them around the ribbon until the tremor stopped. Then she turned toward the kitchen. The fiddle stopped. A note scraped and died. Hannah froze. Silence spread through the barn faster than laughter had. Boots crossed the floor behind her. Daniel passed Frank Turner, past Nancy, past Rebecca, past every woman who had spent the evening hoping he might ask her to dance. He stopped in front of Hannah. The scene from 6 months later had finally caught up with itself. Daniel removed his hat. He extended his hand. "Miss Collins, May I have this dance? Hannah stared at his palm. The entire barn seemed to breathe around them. You don't have to make sport of yourself, because they made sport of me. Daniel's jaw tightened. I know. He kept his hand out. Hannah looked at him, then at the crowd. George was no longer smiling. Rebecca had gone pale around the mouth. Nancy stood perfectly still. Daniel did not look at any of them, only Hannah. She lowered her voice. They're watching. Let them. The words struck deeper than he could know, or perhaps he knew exactly. Watch what a man does when everybody is. Hannah remembered the line cabin, the rain, the lantern, her father's old freight roads, Samuel Price laughing where he thought she would not hear. Daniel's hand waited between them. Hannah placed hers in it. A breath moved through the room. Daniel closed his fingers carefully around hers. Not tight, not possessive, steady. He led her onto the floor. The musicians looked uncertain. Daniel glanced at them. Play. The fiddler swallowed and raised his bow. A slow waltz began. Hannah immediately regretted agreeing. Her feet felt too large, her arms too stiff. She could feel every eye following every step. Daniel placed one hand at a respectful distance against her back. Hannah's fingers rested against his shoulder. They moved. Once. Twice. She missed a step. I told you I haven't danced in years. Daniel's mouth moved slightly. I'll follow you until you remember. Hannah looked at him. You're supposed to lead. Not tonight. Despite herself, she almost laughed. They turned. Daniel adjusted his pace to hers. He never pulled, never hurried. The barn began to disappear at the edges. Hannah heard the fiddle, the scrape of boots, Daniel's breathing. Nothing else. Her shoulders loosened. Another turn, then another. Halfway through the song, she stopped looking at the floor. Daniel noticed. He did not say anything. He just kept moving with her. Near the tables, Peter Davis started clapping softly in rhythm. Mary joined. Then one of the older ranch wives. Not everyone did. They did not need to. George set his cup down. Rebecca turned away. Frank Turner watched Daniel with a new kind of calculation. Nancy looked less surprised now than troubled. The song ended. Daniel slowed. Hannah's hand was still in his. For one brief second, neither released the other. Then the applause came. That broke the spell. Hannah looked around. Dozens of faces. Too many. Some kind. Some curious. Some embarrassed. Some amused in a different way now, but all watching. Her breath shortened. Daniel saw the change. Hannah. She pulled her hand free. I need air. Hannah. She stepped backward. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm, too loud. She turned and went through the kitchen door before anyone could stop her. Mary started after her. Daniel lifted one hand. I'll go. He crossed the floor. Behind him, conversation erupted all at once. George muttered something and was told sharply to shut his mouth. Rebecca walked toward the barn doors. Nancy called Daniel's name. He did not turn. Outside the kitchen, Hannah pushed through the back door into the cold. She stopped beside the stacked firewood. The blue ribbon was still crushed in her hand. Inside, the crowd had gotten the ending it wanted. The richest cowboy in Red Creek had asked the mocked maid to dance. But Hannah Collins knew better than to mistake one beautiful moment for the truth. And now Daniel Foster would have to prove why he had done it. Cold air hit her face the moment she stepped behind the kitchen. The barn noise dulled behind the wall. leaving only the muffled rise and fall of voices, the squeak of a wagon tongue near the hitching rail, and the wind moving dry leaves along the yard. Hannah stopped beside the stacked firewood. Her hands would not stay still. She tried to untie the blue ribbon she had wrapped around her fingers without thinking. The knot had tightened. She pulled once. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. "Leave it." Daniel's voice came from the doorway. Hannah closed her hand around the ribbon. He stepped outside and shut the door behind him. For a moment, neither spoke. The lantern over the kitchen door swung in the wind, throwing Daniel's shadow across the woodpile. "You shouldn't have followed me." "I know. You keep saying that. I know that too." Hannah looked away. Daniel took one step closer. She heard it. "Don't." He stopped. The space between them remained several feet wide. Inside the barn, the musicians had started another song. The tune sounded cheerful. That made Hannah want to laugh for all the wrong reasons. Daniel said, "George was wrong. That is not the problem. He humiliated you. So did half the room." His jaw tightened. "I should have stopped it sooner." Hannah looked at him. "Why did you dance with me?" Daniel answered too quickly. "Because what they did was cruel." Her face changed. He saw it. "That's not all I meant, but it came first." "Hannah." She turned toward him fully now. "Was it because you were angry?" Daniel hesitated. That pause was small. It was enough. Hannah nodded. "There. No. You wanted to make a point. I wanted them to stop. So you used me to teach them manners. That is not what happened." "Then tell me what did." Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came. For a man who could settle cattle contracts in 2 sentences, he suddenly had no useful words. Hannah looked down at the ribbon in her hand. "I knew this was a mistake." "The dance?" "Believing it meant what I wanted it to mean." Daniel's voice lowered. "What did you want it to mean?" She laughed once, quietly. Not because anything was funny. That is the sort of question a man asks when he already knows the answer. Daniel looked toward the ground. Hannah turned the ribbon over between her fingers. "I spent years learning not to mistake attention for respect." He looked up. She continued, "I will not spend the next 10 wondering whether you loved me or simply hated what they did to me." The words landed harder than any accusation she could have shouted. Daniel took another step. Hannah stepped back. He stopped again. "Don't tell me tonight," she said. "Hannah, listen. No. I need to explain. Tomorrow." He went quiet. She looked toward the barn. "Tonight, everybody is watching." That was the line that stopped him. The same promise from the cabin had returned to him with its edge reversed. Watch what a man does when everybody is. He had done exactly that, and it still had not been enough. Daniel's shoulders lowered slightly. "All right." Hannah looked at him, almost surprised. He removed his hat, held it at his side. "Tomorrow." She nodded. Daniel went back inside. Hannah stayed by the woodpile until the wind cooled her face and the ribbon finally loosened between her fingers. She did not return to the dancing. The next morning, Daniel was gone. His horse was missing from the south stable. So was his heavy trail coat. No note waited in the kitchen. No message came through Mary. By noon, Hannah had asked no one where he went. By supper, she had asked twice. Mary knew nothing. Nancy said only, "Business." 3 days passed, then 4. Rebecca remained at Silver Spur. That made the silence worse. She ate breakfast with Nancy, rode the lower pasture with one of the ranch hands, helped choose fabric samples for new parlor curtains. Hannah noticed everything she wished she did not. On the fifth morning, Nancy found her folding blankets in the upstairs hall. Hannah, she set down the blanket. Yes? Nancy held a ring of keys in one hand. I think we should speak plainly. Hannah waited. Nancy glanced toward the staircase before continuing. People are talking. They always do. This is different. Because of the dance. Nancy's mouth tightened. Yes. Hannah folded another blanket. Nancy watched her. It may be more comfortable for everyone if, after the season, you consider another position. Hannah's hands stopped. For everyone? Nancy sighed. Do not make me sound cruel. I didn't. Silver Spur has responsibilities. Daniel has responsibilities. And I am one of the problems? I did not say that. You did not have to. Nancy's face softened for only a second. Hannah, I am trying to prevent worse gossip. Hannah looked at her. I have survived gossip. I know. No, Mrs. Foster. You know that I keep working. Silence filled the hallway. Nancy looked older then. Not kinder. Just tired. Hannah picked up the folded blankets. When would you like me gone? Nancy's eyes sharpened. I did not dismiss you. You suggested I disappear before I become inconvenient. Hannah. That is different? Nancy had no answer. By evening, Hannah had taken her trunk down from the shelf. Mary found her folding dresses. What are you doing? Packing. No. Hannah looked up. Mary. He'll come back. That is not the point. It is exactly the point. No. Hannah folded the blue dress. Carefully. Too carefully. Mary sat on the edge of the bed. You think he ran? I think I don't know, and you hate that. Hannah closed the trunk halfway. I hate needing to know. Mary did not argue. Outside, evening settled over Silver Spur. The first hard frost had turned the yard pale. Hannah carried a small box downstairs and set it near the back door. She had nearly decided to ask Dr. Miller whether his sister still needed help at the boarding house in Red Creek. Then hoofbeats sounded beyond the south gate. Mary ran to the kitchen window. Hannah. Hannah did not move. Hannah. This time Mary's voice changed. Hannah crossed the room. 2 riders came through the gate. Daniel was one. The other man wore a dark wool coat, city boots, and carried a leather document case strapped behind his saddle. Daniel dismounted. He looked tired. Dust covered the hem of his coat. He glanced toward the kitchen window. Saw Hannah. Stopped. For several seconds, neither moved. Then the stranger swung down beside him and handed Daniel a folded set of papers. Nancy stepped onto the porch. Daniel, where have you been? Daniel did not answer her first. He kept looking at Hannah. Then he said, Durango. The stranger adjusted his gloves. Charles Morgan. Hannah recognized the name. A lawyer. Daniel walked toward the house. The papers were still in his hand. He had disappeared at the exact moment Hannah needed an answer. Now he had returned with a lawyer, a document case, and something that had been written before the dance ever happened. Daniel did not ask her to meet him in the parlor. He chose the office. The same room where cattle contracts were signed, wages recorded, and winter feed costs worked out in pencil along the margins of ledgers. Hannah stood just inside the door. Charles Morgan set his leather case on the desk and opened the brass clasps. Nancy remained in the hallway. Rebecca stood farther back near the staircase. Daniel looked at both of them. I need the room. Nancy's expression tightened. Rebecca said nothing. A moment later, the door closed. Only Hannah, Daniel, and the lawyer remained. Charles removed several folded documents tied with narrow red tape. He laid them carefully beside Daniel's inkstand. Hannah did not sit. Neither did Daniel. Charles adjusted his spectacles. Miss Collins, Mr. Foster asked me to explain this plainly. Hannah folded her hands. I'd appreciate that. Charles opened the first paper. This concerns a property north of Red Creek, commonly called Cottonwood Station. Hannah frowned. She knew the place. Everyone did. The old stage stop sat beside the northern road, where freight wagons turned toward Durango. The coach line had shifted routes years earlier, leaving behind a weathered house, stable, kitchen building, and several acres of neglected land near Cottonwood Creek. Charles continued. 22 acres, main dwelling, stable, smokehouse, well rights, existing road access. Hannah looked at Daniel. He said nothing. Charles slid a paper toward her. The property was purchased by Mr. Foster. Hannah's stomach sank. Of course. Another gift. Another solution arranged by a rich man who could make difficulty disappear with a signature. She stepped back from the desk. I don't want it. Daniel finally spoke. You haven't heard the terms. I don't need to, Hannah. You disappeared for 5 days and came back with land. Charles quietly removed his spectacles and began polishing them. Daniel rubbed one hand across his jaw. I did not buy it this week. That stopped her. What? Charles replaced his spectacles. The agreement was drafted 3 weeks before the harvest party. Hannah looked at him. Charles turned the document and pointed to the date. September 18th, 1881. The dance had happened in October. Hannah read the date again, then once more. Her fingers moved toward the paper but stopped before touching it. Daniel said, I went to Durango because Morgan sent word that the final title work was ready. Hannah looked up. You bought it before the party? Yes. Why? Daniel glanced toward Charles. The lawyer understood. I can wait outside. When the door shut behind him, silence settled over the office. Hannah stood on one side of the desk. Daniel stood on the other, the same distance that had once separated employer from maid. It felt different now. You remember the morning we talked about the old stage roads? Daniel asked. Hannah nodded slowly. You said your father used to stop at places where a traveler could get coffee, a hot meal, and a bed, without anyone asking where they came from. I remember. You said if you had money of your own, you'd run a place like that. Hannah stared at him. She had almost forgotten saying it. It had been before sunrise in the kitchen. Rain against the window. Daniel drinking from the brown mug. She had been trimming burnt crust from a loaf. A careless dream spoken because she never expected anyone to remember. Daniel went on. You said people deserve one door that opens before somebody decides whether they belong. Hannah looked down at the papers. You remembered that? Yes. Her throat tightened. Daniel continued before she could mistake his meaning. It is not a gift. That made her look up again. The purchase price, repairs, furniture, livestock feed, all of it goes into the account. You run the station. Profits repay the investment. And when it's paid, it becomes yours. Hannah stared at him. All of it. The property. The house, the acreage, no percentage, no share held by Silver Spur, no. She looked suspiciously toward the papers. Daniel almost smiled. That is why I brought a lawyer. Charles returned when Daniel called him. He spent nearly half an hour going through each page. The terms were written plainly. Initial investment. Repair expenses. Repayment schedule based on profits rather than fixed monthly demands. No claim against Hannah's personal wages. No forfeiture if winter traffic slowed. Transfer of title after repayment. Hannah listened carefully. She asked questions. Charles answered every one. Then he unfolded the final page. A line near the bottom had already been prepared for the future deed. Hannah Collins. Not Daniel Foster. Not Silver Spur Ranch. Her name. Hannah touched the edge of the paper. Why is my name already here? Charles looked toward Daniel. Daniel answered. Because that was the point. Hannah lowered herself into the chair. For several seconds, she heard only the small clock on the shelf. Tick, tick, tick. Daniel remained standing. He did not come around the desk. He did not touch her shoulder. He waited. Hannah looked at the date again. 3 weeks before the dance. Before George Wilson laughed. Before the barn went silent. Before Daniel crossed the floor. Before anyone had forced him to prove anything. She whispered, "You were already doing this." "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted the papers finished." "You could have said something." Daniel looked down. "I nearly did." "When?" "The night behind the kitchen." Hannah remembered. His hesitation. The answer that had come wrong. Because what they did was cruel. She had heard pity where he had failed to find the deeper words. Daniel continued. "I was angry that night." "I know, but not because I suddenly decided you mattered." Hannah's eyes lifted. He held them. "You already did." No grand speech followed. No promise. Just the sentence. Hannah looked away first. Charles cleared his throat softly. "There is no need to sign today." Hannah nodded. "I won't." Daniel's face did not change. Then she added, "Not until I inspect the place." Charles smiled faintly. "That is sensible." Daniel released a slow breath. 2 days later, Hannah rode north with Daniel and Charles. Cottonwood Station looked worse than she remembered. One porch post leaned. The stable roof had lost several shingles. A window was cracked. The kitchen stove was rusted around one hinge. Dead weeds stood waist-high beside the road. Hannah walked through every room. She checked the well pump, opened cabinets, looked beneath the stairs, tested the bedroom windows. She stood in the old dining room while afternoon light crossed the floorboards. Daniel stayed near the doorway. "Well?" he asked. Hannah ran her hand across a scarred table. "It needs work." "Yes." "The stable roof leaks." "Yes." "The kitchen chimney needs cleaning." "I saw that." "The north fence is nearly down." Daniel nodded. Hannah turned. "I'll take it." He smiled then. A real one. Small, but impossible to miss. Hannah did not smile back immediately. "There's something else." Daniel's expression changed. Charles, standing outside, suddenly found great interest in examining the hitching rail. Hannah faced Daniel. "I know what you were going to ask in the office." He was quiet. "You had something else planned." Daniel looked toward the floor, then reached into the inside pocket of his coat. His hand stopped there. Hannah shook her head. "No." Daniel looked at her. "You don't even know the question." "I do." Silence. Hannah stepped closer, but not close enough to touch. "You've shown me what you can give me." His hand came out of his coat, empty. She continued. I need to know whether you can stand beside me when I don't need anything from you. Daniel's face went still. The wind moved through the broken window. Somewhere outside, Charles's horse snorted. Daniel nodded once, slowly. Then he reached back into his coat, removed a folded scrap of paper Hannah had never seen, and put it away in his wallet without opening it. She understood. A question had been written there, or perhaps words he had been afraid to trust himself to say. He did not ask. "All right," he said. No argument, no persuasion. That mattered more than Hannah expected. She signed the partnership papers the following morning. Her hand was steady. Mary cried when she heard. Mrs. Bell pretended dust had gotten in her eye. Nancy said little. Rebecca had already returned to her father's ranch. At the end of the week, Hannah loaded her trunk into a wagon, the same battered trunk she had carried through Silver Spur's gate 6 months earlier. Mary climbed onto the seat beside her. "You sure?" Hannah looked toward the main house. Daniel stood on the porch. He had not asked her to stay. He had spent 3 days sending lumber, nails, hinges, lamp chimneys, 2 iron bedsteads, and a second-hand kitchen table toward Cottonwood. All entered into the account. Every receipt kept. Every expense written down. Hannah appreciated that too. She climbed onto the wagon. Daniel walked down from the porch. For a moment they stood beside the rear wheel. "When will you open?" he asked. "When it's ready, that sounds like you." Hannah looked at him. "Coffee will cost you." "How much?" "More than Silver Spur." Daniel nodded solemnly. "I'll prepare myself." She smiled despite trying not to. Then she climbed onto the seat. The wagon rolled toward the north gate. Daniel stayed where he was. Hannah looked back only once. He had not moved. She had spent months wondering whether Daniel Foster would choose her before other people. Now she was leaving his ranch to discover something harder, whether he could keep choosing her after she no longer belonged to anything he owned. Cottonwood Station changed slowly. At first it looked like a place winter had already forgotten. The porch leaned at one corner. Wind pushed through the kitchen window frame. The stable roof leaked near the north wall, and the old sign beside the road had faded until only the word Cottonwood could still be read. Hannah liked it anyway. There was work she could see. That mattered. Daniel sent the lumber he had promised, along with nails, 2 new hinges, a crate of lamp chimneys, and an iron cook stove bought second-hand in Durango. Every delivery came with a receipt. Hannah kept them all in a wooden box beside the account ledger. Nothing was free. Nothing was vague. She preferred it that way. Mary moved in a week later. She brought 2 dresses, a hairbrush, 3 books, and more opinions than furniture. The upstairs room leaks. "I know. The pantry smells like mice." "I know. The mattress in my room leans. That is not the mattress." Mary looked at the floor. "Oh." Hannah laughed. By November, freighters began stopping. The first was an older man hauling barrels toward Silverton. He asked for coffee. Hannah charged him 2 cents. He asked for supper. She charged him 20. He ate beans, salt pork, biscuits, and apple preserves at the scarred dining table, then slept upstairs beneath 2 wool blankets. The next morning he left a nickel extra. Hannah tried to return it. He closed her fingers over the coin. Coffee was worth it. Mary watched from the doorway. When the wagon disappeared down the road, she said, "You smiled." "I did not." "You did." Within weeks, Cottonwood Station found its rhythm. Stage drivers watered horses at the well. Cowboys stopped for stew. A traveling salesman paid for 3 nights because the mountain road had frozen. Hannah learned which guests wanted conversation and which wanted quiet. She kept the front room warm. She scrubbed the coffee mugs until the rims were white. She checked the stable latch every night before bed, and once a week she entered numbers into the ledger: flour, coffee, lamp oil, feed, repayment to Daniel Foster. The first payment was small. Daniel accepted it without argument. That mattered too. He came to Cottonwood 3 times before Christmas, always with a reason. Once to inspect the repaired well pump, once to deliver a missing hinge, once, supposedly, because he was passing nearby. Hannah looked out the window at his horse. "You came 6 miles off the south road." Daniel took off his gloves. "Did I?" "You know you did." He sat at the table. "Coffee?" 2 cents. Highway robbery. She poured it anyway. He never stayed more than an hour. He never asked whether she had changed her mind. Never mentioned the folded paper he had put back into his coat. Sometimes that restraint bothered Hannah more than pressure would have. One afternoon, Daniel arrived while Mary was repairing a curtain. Mary looked between them. "I forgot something in the stable." Hannah glanced at her. "You have never remembered anything in the stable." Mary left anyway. Daniel watched the door close. "She is subtle. She believes she is." He smiled. Hannah set down his coffee. Their fingers touched briefly against the mug. Neither pulled away at once. Then Daniel did. He looked toward the window. Snow had begun falling. "You should get back before the road ices." "I know." Hannah folded her arms. "You keep saying that." Daniel looked at her. For one moment, the kitchen behind Silver Spur seemed to exist again. The woodpile, the blue ribbon, the cold night after the dance. His mouth moved slightly. "So do you." Hannah smiled. Then he left. The early winter held mild until January. That changed in a single day. The morning began gray. By noon, wind came hard from the mountains. By 2, snow had swallowed the road. Hannah stood on the porch watching the world disappear. Mary came beside her. "Anybody out in this?" "Somebody always is." Inside, they filled the woodbox and kept soup simmering. Near dusk, horses appeared through the white. 4 riders. 1 man slumped low in the saddle. Hannah ran into the yard. "Bring him inside!" The nearest cowboy jumped down. "It's Daniel." Everything inside Hannah went still, only for a second. Then she moved. Daniel's horse had slipped on ice below the mountain pass, while the men were trying to move stranded cattle toward lower pasture. He was conscious but pale. His right leg would not take weight. 2 men helped him through the door. Hannah cleared the front room. "Put him on the bed." Daniel managed, "I can sit." "No." He looked at her. Not employer. Not ranch owner. Not the wealthiest cattleman in Red Creek. Just Daniel. He stopped arguing. Dr. Miller could not reach Cottonwood in the storm, so Hannah did what she had done years before on freight roads and months earlier with Peter Davis. She checked where Daniel hurt. No blood. No obvious break. His ribs were sore, his leg badly bruised, and his ankle swollen. Hannah wrapped the ankle, kept him warm, and made him drink broth. Daniel complained exactly once. She gave him a look. He stopped. The storm continued through the night. Mary slept in the kitchen chair. The cowboys took blankets near the stove. Hannah stayed beside Daniel. Every few hours, she changed the cool cloth on his forehead and checked his breathing. Sometime after midnight, Daniel woke. The lamp had burned low. Hannah sat asleep in the chair beside the bed. One hand still held the folded cloth. Her head had fallen against the wall. Daniel watched her. For a long time. He had seen Hannah in a kitchen apron, in stable dirt, in a blue dress under lantern light, across a desk with papers bearing her name. Now she sat in a house she ran herself, exhausted because she had chosen to care for him. Nothing in the room belonged to Daniel. Not the bed, not the stove, not the dishes, not the land. He could offer no position, no wages, no protection. And still she had stayed. Daniel closed his eyes. By morning, the storm had weakened. 2 days later, Dr. Miller finally arrived. He examined Daniel and declared the ankle sprained, ribs bruised, pride damaged. Daniel said, "My pride is fine." Hannah handed the doctor coffee. "No, it isn't." Dr. Miller laughed. Daniel stayed another 4 days, long enough to walk with a cane, long enough to irritate Hannah by trying to carry firewood, long enough for something quiet to settle between them. On the 5th morning, the sky cleared. Daniel put on his coat. Hannah stood near the kitchen table. His horse waited outside. "You're leaving." "I am. You should rest another day. I can rest at Silver Spur." She nodded. Daniel reached for his gloves, then stopped. "Hannah," she looked at him. "I meant everything I showed you." Her hands became still. Daniel continued. "But I'm done trying to convince you." She said nothing. "If you ever believe me, you'll know where I am." He opened the door. Cold sunlight spilled across the floor. He stepped toward it. "Daniel." He stopped. The door remained open. Wind moved lightly through the room. Daniel turned. Hannah was crossing toward him, slowly. Not as a maid being summoned, not as a woman being rescued, as someone walking on her own floor toward a man who had finally learned how to wait. Hannah stopped a few feet from Daniel. Cold air moved through the open doorway behind him. Outside, his horse shifted at the hitching rail, leather tack creaking softly in the morning stillness. Daniel waited. He did not ask what she wanted. He had finally learned not to. Hannah looked down at his gloved hand. Then she reached for it. Daniel's fingers closed around hers almost by instinct, but gently enough that she could have pulled away. She didn't. "I spent a long time believing something," Hannah said. Daniel stayed quiet. That if a man cared for me, he would care quietly. Her thumb moved once across the worn leather of his glove, where nobody could see. Daniel's face tightened. Hannah continued. "I thought that was the best I could expect. Someone who liked me behind a closed door, then apologized for atu when he stepped outside." "Hannah." She shook her head. "Let me finish." He nodded. She looked toward the front window. Morning sunlight lay across the tables she had scrubbed herself. The ledger sat closed beside the coffee tin. Through the glass she could see the stable Mary had helped repair and the sign Daniel's men had rehung beside the road. Cottonwood Station. Her place. Her work. Her choice. "When you danced with me," she said, "I thought you were trying to save me from that room." Daniel's eyes lowered. "I was trying to stop them." "I know." She looked back at him. "But you had already listened to me before that. You remembered something I said when I didn't even think it mattered." Daniel said nothing. "You gave me a chance to build something without making me owe you my life for it." His mouth moved faintly. "You still owe me for the stove." Hannah stared at him. Daniel's expression remained serious for one beat too long. Then she laughed. A small sound at first. "You choose now to make a joke? I've been injured. My judgment may be poor." Her laughter softened. Daniel looked at her as if the sound itself were worth waiting through a winter for. Hannah squeezed his hand. "You were the first man who was kinder to me in public than he was willing to pretend to be in private." Daniel's humor disappeared. He stepped no closer. "I'll wait as long as you need." Hannah looked at him for several seconds. Then she drew his hand toward her and closed his fingers firmly around hers. Then stop waiting. Daniel froze. The understanding came slowly across his face. Hannah. Yes. You know what I'm asking? You haven't asked anything yet. For once, Daniel Foster looked almost nervous. He glanced toward the open door, then toward the empty dining room. No ranchers, no family, no Rebecca, no Nancy. No crowd waiting to see what the wealthiest cattleman in Red Creek might do. Only Hannah. Daniel removed his glove. His bare hand closed around hers. Hannah Collins, he said, will you marry me? She let him wait just long enough to make his eyebrows draw together. Then she smiled. Yes. Daniel breathed out. It sounded almost like a laugh. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. Nothing more. Hannah did not need more. When Mary came in from the stable carrying an empty feed bucket, she stopped so suddenly the bucket struck the doorframe. She looked at their joined hands, then at Hannah, then Daniel. Oh. Hannah laughed again. Mary dropped the bucket. I knew it. Daniel raised an eyebrow. You knew what? Everything. You certainly did not. I knew enough. She crossed the room and threw her arms around Hannah before either of them could object. The wedding was set for spring. Nancy assumed it would take place at Silver Spur. Hannah corrected her. Cottonwood. Nancy stared across Daniel's dining table. The station. My home. Daniel, seated beside her, did not hesitate. Cottonwood. Nancy looked at him. You cannot possibly mean to have your wedding at a roadside boarding house. Hannah reached for her coffee. Daniel said, It has better coffee. Hannah nearly choked. Nancy closed her eyes briefly, but she did not argue again. By May, the last heavy snow had retreated high into the San Juan Mountains. Cottonwood Creek ran fast with meltwater. New grass appeared along the roadside, and wildflowers pushed through the softer ground near the fence. Mary hung bunches of blue flax and yellow mule's ear beneath the porch. Mrs. Bell arrived from Silver Spur before sunrise with enough food to feed twice the expected guests. Peter Davis came on horseback, his old injury leaving only the smallest stiffness in his leg. Dr. Miller brought his wife. Cowboys tied horses along the cottonwood fence. Freight wagons lined the northern road. Even several men who had laughed in Silver Spur's barn arrived in clean shirts and carefully avoided Hannah's eyes. George Wilson did not come. Hannah did not ask why. The ceremony took place beneath the cottonwoods beside the house. Hannah wore the blue dress again. Mary had altered it once more, replacing the old ribbon with a narrow strip of white lace at the collar. Daniel wore a dark coat that fit poorly across his shoulders because he refused to buy another. Before they stepped outside, Hannah stood alone for a moment in her bedroom. She looked at herself in the mirror. The same woman, same body, same brown hair, same hands. Only now she did not tug the fabric loose around her waist. A knock sounded. Mary opened the door. You ready? Hannah smiled at her reflection. Yes. This time she meant it. Daniel was waiting beneath the trees. When he saw her, he forgot to breathe for a second. Mary noticed. So did Frank Turner, she whispered. Hannah glanced toward the guests. Frank had not come. Rebecca had. She stood alone near the back of the gathering in a plain gray-blue dress. After the vows, after Daniel placed a simple gold band on Hannah's finger, after everyone had eaten until Mrs. Bell declared the tables properly defeated, Rebecca approached her. Hannah was standing near the porch. Rebecca stopped several feet away. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Rebecca looked toward Daniel, who was laughing with Peter beside the hitching rail, then back at Hannah. "I knew where he was looking that night before you did." Hannah waited. Rebecca lowered her eyes. "I didn't like what that said about me." The old Hannah might have softened the moment for her, might have hurried to make Rebecca comfortable. She did not. Rebecca looked up. "I was cruel." Hannah nodded once. "Yes." Rebecca swallowed. "I'm sorry." Wind moved through the cottonwood leaves overhead. Hannah looked at her for another moment. "Then, don't be that woman anymore." Rebecca nodded. No embrace followed. No sudden friendship. Only the truth. It was enough as evening settled over Cottonwood. Lanterns were lit beneath the trees. Someone carried the tables aside. The fiddlers began tuning. Hannah heard the first notes and went still. The sound carried her voice instantly. Silver spur. The barn. George laughing. The ribbon in her hand. A dance floor she had wanted to escape. People moved aside. Daniel approached. For half a second, the old scene stood over the new one like a shadow. Daniel stopped before her. He removed his hat, then held out his hand. "Mrs. Foster, may I have this dance?" Hannah looked around. Mary stood beside Mrs. Bell. Peter leaned against the porch post. Travelers she had fed through winter watched from the fence. Cowboys who once knew her only as a maid now stood in a place she had built. Months earlier, Hannah would have searched each face. She would have listened for laughter before allowing herself to breathe. Tonight she looked only at Daniel. She put her hand in his. "You still asking?" His smile came slowly. "Every time." The fiddle began. They stepped onto the packed earth beneath the cottonwoods. Daniel placed one hand at her back. Hannah rested hers on his shoulder. He waited for her first step. She noticed. "You're still following me?" "I learned my lesson." They moved beneath the lantern light. No polished floor, no grand ballroom, just boots on earth, wind in the trees, horses shifting beyond the fence. Snow still shining faintly on the highest mountain peaks. Halfway through the song, Daniel leaned closer. "Silver Spur has plenty of room." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "So does Cottonwood. Silver Spur has 6 bedrooms. Cottonwood has better coffee." Daniel considered that with exaggerated seriousness. "That's a difficult argument to beat." Hannah laughed. Loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. This time she did not cover her mouth. She did not lower her head. She did not wonder who might be watching. Daniel turned her beneath the lanterns, careful of the uneven ground. Then she came back to him. Months earlier, a room full of people had laughed because they believed Hannah Collins should be ashamed to take up space. Now she stood on her own land, in her own blue dress, dancing with the man she had chosen as freely as he had chosen her. Daniel had never made Hannah worthy. She had been worthy before he knew her name. What changed was simpler. He learned how to see her. Then he learned how to stand beside her without asking her to become smaller, so there would be room for him too. The fiddle carried into the warm spring night. Hannah laughed again, and Daniel kept dancing. Under those lanterns, with the mountains fading into the spring night behind them, there was nothing left for Hannah to prove. She had a home built by her own hands, work she could call her own, and a man beside her who had learned that real love did not mean rescuing someone. It meant respecting the life they had fought to build. Imagine standing where Hannah once stood in that crowded barn. Imagine hearing people laugh, feeling every eye on you, and wondering whether it would be easier to disappear than risk being seen again. Would you have taken Daniel's hand? And after being hurt before, would you have found the courage to trust what came next? Maybe that is what makes Hannah's story stay with us. Sometimes healing does not arrive in one grand moment. Sometimes it comes quietly, in a cup of coffee remembered, a promise kept when nobody is applauding, a hand offered without pressure, or someone patient enough to let you choose for yourself. And perhaps the right kind of love never asks you to become smaller, just so another person can feel bigger beside you. If Hannah's journey touched something in you, tell me in the comments. Would you have taken Daniel's hand that night? And if you'd like to spend more evenings with stories of love, mystery, second chances, and hearts finding their way home, you are warmly invited to subscribe. There are many more stories waiting down the road.